Well, Victoria's Liberal and National parties have indicated they are reconsidering their support for the state's First Nations treaty process. Earlier, I spoke to Liberal MP James Newbury a short time ago. He says he's concerned at what he says is a lack of transparency from the government amid an ongoing debate around cultural heritage laws. But I thought the Liberals and Nationals were going to support the treaty process, or at least the process around it.
The Liberal Party and the Coalition are having conversations around this issue, as you would expect. They're having conversations, deep conversations about this. What I can tell you is that we are concerned about the government hiding this process and things like financial reparations. You know, is Jacinta Allen offering people money, taxpayer money, at a time our state is I mean, we're financially up the creek. Is she offering money as part of those treaty reparations? Very concerning.
Okay, so just to be clear, the coalition at the moment in Victoria doesn't support the treaty process.
I think that it's appropriate that the Shadow makes whatever announcement he may make when he chooses to make it.
I'm pleased to say I'm now joined here in our Melbourne studio by the Victorian Nationals leader and also the opposition spokesperson on Aboriginal Affairs, Peter Walsh. Peter, thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure, Simon.
So, developers across Victoria claim they're being delayed by legally mandated Indigenous cultural heritage requirements. Now, the developers have been out in the media saying that that roadblock sort of threatens potentially the government's views to trying to build more homes across the state. But are you concerned that that's having a different effect too across the state at all?
Well, I share those concerns that the developers have been saying, and that is exacerbated by the Bunurong Land Council going into administration, which covers most of the greater area of Melbourne. So that's held the process up even longer. But there's been issues across regional Victoria dating back years where people can't get the study done that they need. They can't get even get a response to a request to have a study quite often. It's very expensive, takes a lot of time, and in a lot of cases not approved, particularly when it's been disturbed previously. Classic example I had was someone that wanted to de-silt a Goldmurray Water channel. So channel that was built decades ago, silt in it, zero chance of cultural heritage issues, but they couldn't actually get permission to clean that channel out so they could have water for their piggery.
We heard earlier from Mr Newbury about treaty. This discussion around cultural heritage, has it sparked a rethink of the Coalition's view on treaty, and what is the Coalition's current stance on treaty?
So it has sparked a review. I think link that with the Traditional Owner Settlement Act and the Brinjigurran case in Western Victoria, where there's been a major agreement signed by the government last October before they went to caretaker mode. No engagement with the 8 councils out there that are part of that, local government areas, no engagement with the rest of the community. As James said in the interview, I think that you played before we started, we're very concerned about the secrecy. We're all about openness and transparency, all about all of Victoria being involved in these discussions, and that's not the case. We have had internal discussions, and we don't believe we should proceed with treaty until issues around cultural heritage, until issues around the Traditional Owner Settlement Act are actually resolved. I moved into Parliament last year that we actually have a parliamentary review. The Planning and Environment Committee of the Lower House actually having an investigation into the Cultural Heritage Act and how it's functioning in Victoria and the concerns around that. Crickets from the government, no desire to actually review it, even though there is a lot of concerns being expressed by people right across Victoria.
So just to be clear, the Coalition in Victoria no longer backs the treaty process?
No, we don't.
Is this a big moment here where essentially a treaty process is eroded? Because it had bipartisan support 2 years ago when the the implementation bill went before the Parliament. You've changed your mind. You've done a U-turn on this.
We have. That we supported the discussions going forward. I've raised with the First Peoples Assembly, the previous First Peoples Assembly and the current First Peoples Assembly and their co-chairs, that we have major concerns, particularly around how cultural heritage is working or not working in Victoria. And we want to see those issues resolved before we move on to the next lot of discussions.
With that in mind, I want to play you some of what you said in the Parliament when the bill was moved in June 2022. And this was quite a moment. I was there in the chamber. Let's take a listen.
What I'd like to do, Speaker, is also dispel the myth that has been created by some around this process that it is only the Labor Party that will actually work with the Indigenous community on treaty. This side of the House, both the Liberals and the Nationals parties, are committed to working with the Indigenous community on treaty as well.
So that was your voice, and we can see you there delivering the end of that speech back in 2022. I mean, did you ever expect you'd have to change your position on this when you were speaking back then?
Well, we were speaking in good faith about the discussions going forward. Since that time, things have changed. We want to see change around those particular two acts and the implementation of them, as I mentioned before. So if something's not working, you reassess and you change your mind. You don't continue to go down a path if it's not working. And we're having issues raised. Our members of Parliament are having issues raised all the time. A lot of people won't speak out, but those that are usually speaking out on the condition that they're not named because they're concerned that if they do speak out, they'll never ever get a cultural heritage study done.
Have you ever made this position clear to members of the Indigenous community, Indigenous elders, First Peoples Assembly of Victoria at all?
Yes, I have.
And so, what was their reaction?
So their reaction was, let's solve it with the treaty process. Our view is, no, we need to solve it before we go forward. That it will take too long and there'll be too much damage done to the Victorian economy. The stories last week about the additional cost it's putting on a housing block just makes it even harder again for people to get into their first home.
Now, you've been in the Parliament a long time. You sit right across the aisle. You've sat across the aisle from Jacinta Allen. You both from electorates very close to each other. Her in Bendigo, you're north, just in Echuca. Have you ever made your views known to the Premier at all, or would you be open to a discussion with the Premier on this?
I would be, and I sought, I've had raised the issue with Natalie Hutchins, the Minister, last year.
Yeah.
Obviously moved in the Parliament to have that referral to the Planning and Environment Committee to actually have a look at this Act and how it's working. That would be the best process, Simon. Actually have a parliamentary committee where people can come in and give evidence and there can be recommendations made as to how this could work better in the future. What you have at the moment is a traditional owners group with a monopoly on delivering those cultural heritage studies with no accountability about timeliness or price or actually getting an outcome for people. If someone has a government monopoly, they have a responsibility to do the right thing by those who are requesting a study.
I mean, speaking with figures close to the Indigenous community this afternoon and also within the government, they would tell me that this is a clear U-turn or a backflip from your parties. Now, you obviously acknowledged before that it is a U-turn. Would you change your mind if the government tweaked its policy at all?
Well, it's not a matter of tweaking. I think it requires more than tweaking, Simon.
Yeah.
We haven't made this decision lightly. You played what we said and what other people said. It's not a decision we've made lightly, but I think we have a responsibility as Victorians, as the alternate government, to say the system's not working at the moment. Let's fix the system before we go any further.
And just so I'm clear, John Pesciuto obviously backs this position too, because he indicated there were talks last year, the Liberals on board. Was it a unanimous shadow cabinet decision?
Well, Simon, people. I'm not going to talk about what happened in shadow cabinet.
Well, I can ask.
Other than there was a decision that we need to reassess. Okay. And as I said, you don't take these decisions lightly. But I think it's, in politics, if something's not working, you reassess, you change your mind, you work out how you can fix it rather than just keeping going on because that's what you said a number of years ago.
Just finally, obviously Victoria has led the way, so to speak, on treaty negotiations across the country. There's a discussion at the federal level too about whether a path to treaty can be found in light of last year's referendum. What, in light of your changed view now, would you advise the federal government on the matter of treaty?
Well, it's not for me to advise the federal government on what they should do, but I suppose our starting point has always been we would support something that actually solves Aboriginal disadvantage, actually works towards correcting the closing the gap indicators. We've been adamant about that through this whole debate, as long as I've been involved, that it has to deliver real outcomes on the ground for Indigenous people around education, around housing, around employment, and particularly reducing incarceration. They're things that are very dear to our heart. At the moment, we don't see what's going on actually making any positive impact on that.
Peter Walsh, do appreciate your time and thanks for coming in today.
Thanks, Simon.
Victorian Nationals leader Peter Walsh joining us here in our Melbourne studio. Well, a national